Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about criticism and taking a stand from a Heideggerian and Dreyfus lens. We're primarily going to do this through the analyzing of parts of this work, Being in the World. This is an interpretive text by Hubert Dreyfus of Heidegger's Being in Time and just in general, Heidegger's ideas. But we're going to explore those two concepts in relation and in reference to this work. And it's going to be a fascinating exploration, so stay with me through the rest of this video. So Heidegger has many rich ideas, but in this video we're going to just specifically be talking about taking a stand and a thrownness, the throne state of the human being, and then what are some of the practical applications of this in relation to criticism and people's opinion of your position in life, your stand, however you present yourself to the world. But before we go into the practical applications, just a little bit deeper exploration in terms of what thrownness and taking a stand exactly are in a Heideggerian sense. Taking a stand, and I'm going to try to explain this. Of course, it's not going to be perfect in relation to Heidegger's work. His work is very complicated, but thrownness is a state where we as human beings find ourselves thrown into the world, not by our choice, right? Like you're born into the world without specifically requesting to have been born into the world. You're just kind of thrown out into the world to figure everything out, to understand everything, to make sense of everything. So that's kind of the thrownness state. And then the taking a stand is that as a human being, by simply existing, you have some position, you have a certain interests, you have a certain stand and opinion on certain topics, you have a certain way of presenting yourself, you have tastes, you have an evaluative framework. So all of that kind of sums up, and especially if it's in an authentic way, all of that sums up who you are and what position you take on into the world. And that's basically your stand. How you interpret different things, how you present yourself to the world, how you think of different situations, that's your stand in the world. And then from this, these are very important because we're going to explore how exactly criticism and other people's opinion of, say, who you are, your stand in your position, what that means and how we can think about all of these concepts. So I want to explore this concept just a little bit more. This position of you taking a stand, there's some important things that Heidegger points out, is that as an individual in the world and taking a stand, you have an evaluative framework. You don't merely exist in a disinterested way. So when you see objects in the external world, or in Heideggerian sense, it doesn't really make sense to talk about the external world, but in the sense that you see other objects or things in your phenomenal perception, you don't engage with them in a disinterested manner. The second you see something, there's an evaluative framework that happens kind of in the background, that happens through socialization, let's say your upbringing, but also your own personal interests and developments, and a freedom of exploration of how you got to, say, certain feelings and evaluative frameworks. So for example, if you see a certain painting, you'll have a different reaction to it than, say, somebody else who sees that painting. The evaluative position they might end up taking is a negative one for that painting, but you might actually end up taking a positive view depending on your socialization and all these other factors that I just mentioned. But the main point that Heidegger is making is that it's incorrect to think of us as just merely existing in a disinterested state in the world. That's never really the case. Every time we exist in the world, it's with a point of interest and an evaluative framework. We assign value to things. We're not disinterested, and primarily this is because we're interested in the outcomes in relation to ourselves, especially from at least the most primitive way, survival. So you care about things in the world in relation to you. And I quote Heidegger here on page 47 from the text. He seems to be saying that the detached, meaning-giving, knowing subject that is at the center of Husserlian phenomenology must be replaced by an embodied, meaning-giving, doing subject. So he says not only is that the human being is not in a disinterested state, but the human being takes action and acts in the physical world. It's not merely just interpretive. So there's the interpretation element, but you're also acting out into the world. And this is important to keep in mind because we evaluate and others evaluate us just like how they would evaluate other objects. So when somebody sees our stand, our position, there's almost an immediate evaluation, and it can be both positive or negative, just like how we assign positive or negative, let's say, to a piece of work or an art. And the same thing, we do the same thing with other people's stand, the way how they do it to us. So naturally, this leads to the things that people stand for. And I quote Heidegger here on page 61. To begin with, we need to recall that the stand design takes on itself, its existence is not something inner through inner thought or experience. It is the way design acts. Heidegger also says, or Heidegger and Dreyfus, design takes a stand on itself through its involvement with things and people. So as I mentioned, it's not just the way how you evaluate a piece of art or your evaluation of an individual or anything in life, but it's also the relation of action of how you engage with those objects that's also very telling. This is kind of there's a cliche that's well known where it's focus on the person's action, not on their words. This is kind of in a similar vein saying the same thing. Or Plato had a quote where he says, basically, you are what you repeatedly do. So it's not just how you evaluate and think of things, but it's also the action in relation to those things. And so this evaluative aspect and the way you act in relation to those things of how you evaluate aspects of the world, that's your stand, that's your position. And from here, we can start to begin to build the particular points of, say, criticism and other people's evaluation and opinion of you. For example, let's say you take a risk on something, or you don't take a risk on something. Those are both different stands. In one case, your authentic self is saying that taking a risk on something is a good idea and is something that the authentic self wants to do. In the other case, the authentic self is not taking a risk on something. And then this kind of action stands on its own as, say, like a painting or an object, and then other individuals can evaluate your stand, whether you're taking the risk or not. So people can dislike or like the fact that you're taking a stand. And now let's explore some more, let's say, practical examples of exactly what the implications of this mean, because there's really a lot of profound practical aspects of this that can be applied to, I think, everyday life here. So as I mentioned, this evaluative framework where we assign value onto things, honestly, I could do a whole video on interpretation, hermeneutics, and evaluation, and the things around that. But for now, I think the most important thing to consider is that I think this comes from an aspect of human freedom, at least phenomenal human freedom. I don't know if like human beings are ultimately free, but the phenomenal perception is that we are free. And this aspect of freedom allows us to, based on, like I said, our socialization and our own personal interests and development, our own self-determined aspect of authenticity, allow us to have a certain evaluative opinion on something. So our stand gets evaluated. For example, I'll talk about some specific ones here. Let's say parts of your personality of how you want to present yourself to people. Say, maybe you like to be direct or you like to be indirect in your communication style. Or let's say you're quiet or you're very verbose. And then so the logical opposites, like you're taking one and then you're also taking the other. You can be either of these things. And then there's many other examples like this, right? You can be kind or you can be unkind. You can try and be beautiful or you cannot be. And all of these things, basically, they're kind of the logical different positions that you can take. And then what ends up happening is that, let's say the case of being quiet and not quiet. So some people might be very verbose, and let's say you're a very talkative person. Other people might interpret this stand in a positive way, but there's also, of course, going to be people who interpret this stand in a negative way. Additionally, the problem ends up happening, though, is that, let's say you're quiet as well, there's also going to be people who interpret this negatively, and there's also going to be people who interpret this positively. The point being here is that it doesn't matter which stand you take. There's going to be people who are going to criticize you, who are not going to like your stand, or you can substitute stand here for you, because you are, in a sense, your stand. So people, in either case, logically, whichever position you take, whether you're quiet or you're verbose, there's going to be people who dislike you. And this is, of course, very important, and comes to that. It's another thing that's often said is, like, don't care about what people think. And there really is certain truth to this, because, as I mentioned, you're required to take a stand by your mere existence. So the second you exist, your stand might develop over time. who you are, but you must take one. It's also, there's another quote, I forgot who it was from, but failing to prepare is basically a position too, right? So if failing to prepare is preparing to fail, you're always taking a position as long as you exist. And continuing, because you're always taking a position, and all human beings are evaluative, hermeneutic animals, people are always going to evaluate your position and your stand. And then there's some other, of course, like a little bit cynical aspects of human nature here, where the same people who disliked, let's say, the fact that you're a quiet person might also dislike the fact now that you're a talkative person. And also, of course, there's a possibility of, let's say, people disliked or people like the fact that you were verbose, but then over time they change, their evaluative framework changes, and now they also dislike you because you're still verbose. So, and then add into the, so there's a little twist where it's the same person might dislike you for being quiet or not quiet. So the same person might dislike you for taking either of the logically only possible stands that you might take in the world and in your personality and behavior. So the conclusion here is that you really should just focus on an authentic exploration and focus, self-determined aspect of your life, and the evaluative framework that comes from other people and the interpretive framework. There's always going to be critiques, and there's always going to be criticism, and there's always going to be people who dislike you. There will always be people who dislike you, irrespective if you have the highest achievement or the lowest achievement. It basically really does not matter. And the core thing to focus on is the fact of just coming to terms with this and accepting this, and understanding that this is like a fundamental aspect of human existence. This has nothing to do with you specifically. There will always be people who dislike you, irrespective of what position you take, and irrespective of how you present yourself, irrespective of what stand you take into the world. And coming to terms with this and basically just developing your authentic self, irrespective of those opinions and criticisms, and basically, not really taking it personal. So I think this is kind of the kernel and the practical advice here, where it's like, this advice I really do believe rings true, where you really should not focus too much on the opinions of others. You shouldn't, especially if you're living in an authentic fashion. And yeah, I think this is extremely practical and important. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Yeah, thank you for staying throughout this whole video. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you thought some of these ideas are worth exploring, please let me know in the comments and just your thoughts on what you think about these. That would be great. I love it helps me further refine my ideas as well. Like, it's just great to have that dialogue. In terms of Heidegger and his work, I mean, this is like super rich, dense work. I basically touched on like a drop in the bucket here of the depth and variety of ideas, the scope of ideas that exist. I think in some other videos, I'm going to touch on, say, like modes of being and like how you can orient yourself in the world. That would be a little bit later on, though. But yeah, so there's a lot of videos coming in terms of this content and just other philosophy, classical literature content. So yeah, if you found this exciting, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.